Hey y'all, it's Horse Thief. Let's talk about the dogs build. By the end of this video, you should be aware of the key characters, items, and treasures you'll want for a good dog comp. Beginning with the end in mind, here's an endgame board. As you take a look at this board, what I really want to focus on are the tyrannical Neros in slots 1 and 7, and the herding dog in slot 2. You'll be spending a lot of time bouncing your Neros back and forth between slots 1 and 7. Before we dive deeper, here's how to walk the dog. Most dogs require being moved around the board each turn. They get a much bigger buff when they occupy a board slot they haven't occupied the last few fights. As this video plays, take notice of the little red foot icon that appears over board slots when I move a dog. This indicates slots where that dog will not activate its buff. There are two main dogs that you'll be walking. Adventuring Husky and Nero are similar in that they like to be as far away from their last position as possible. Nero specifically wants to move between your first slot and your last slot. The other dog you may be walking is the Proud Corgi. The Corgi just wants to be in a different position than it has been for the last 3 combats. Now that you've seen how they walk, I'll play out some key points in a successful dogs game while highlighting the treasures, characters, and items to think about. Notice this board on 5.0 is only running Adventuring Husky. Dogs are a late game comp that you can only decide to play on level 6 once you have Tyrannical Nero. That said, there are a few things that can set you up to be ready for Nero. Let's look at the early game pieces briefly, which are Happy Retriever, Tracking Dog, and Playful Dachshund. As of this video posting, I would ignore all 3 of those dogs and just play Tempo until level 4. At level 4, I'm perfectly happy to start buying Adventuring Husky because it generally adds a 20/20 unit to my board immediately. Skipping forward to 5.1, we need to discuss 2 more characters. The only level 5s that may play on your board with Nero are Proud Corgi and Hardworking Haymaker. Haymaker is a critical unit in this build as it allows you to save a portion of your food stats from turn to turn. Haymaker also provides a nominal amount of food stats before you can find Nero. Haymaker is a must-have. Also note that Haymaker's food retention effect works from the bench. In the endgame, you're not planning to play Haymaker on the board at all. Proud Corgi is interesting in that it can help you line up a powerful level 5 treasure, but doesn't really get big stats until Nero arrives. Often, I'd rather speculate on Narcissus than a Proud Corgi because I mainly want the treasure. The Corgi can be added to your board on 6 if you need another dog for Nero to buff though. Since we're talking about level 5 characters, let's look at what treasures we want. These aren't key treasures for the build, but can really help. We're interested in Philosopher's Stone and Shard of Excalibur. Philosopher's Stone should be immediately useful, especially with Haymaker or Adventuring Husky, but it's really perfect if we find a Nero immediately on level 6. Shard of Excalibur is also a planning for Nero play. We'd especially like grabbing Shard on our last gold on 5.2. Fast forwarding again, here's a typical 6.0 board state. This round lucked out by finding a Nero immediately. Now we can finally commit to playing dogs. You should not commit to a dog build prior to finding Nero. Let's get to the meat and bones of this build. Your key characters are Tyrannical Nero, Hardworking Haymaker, which we already discussed, and Herding Dog. Here's how it works. Nero generates a large amount of food stats for all of your dogs. Herding Dog shares its food stats mid-combat with everyone who currently has food stats as a dying breath effect. One note, Herding Dog's stat share doesn't count as food stats, it counts as other stats. Finally, Hardworking Haymaker retains a portion of those food stats from fight to fight. While we like Haymaker's food stat share on level 5, it's not enough food to care about keeping her on the board once we have enough dogs. Again, Haymaker will retain food stats from the bench. We'd especially love to triple Nero or Herding Dog in order to find our most important treasure, anticipating drumroll. Since Nero's effect is an entrance, drumroll generates a whole lot more food stats for the combat, allowing Haymaker to save a bigger chunk into the following turn too. Skipping later into level 6, there are a few honorable mentions to point out. They're Good Boy, the Fisherman and the Flounder, and Dr. Frankenstein. The first 2 make sense at times on your dog board if you find you have a lot of good aligned pieces. Good Boy can gain a lot of stats from the herding dog and potentially share those with the Fisherman and the Flounder. Fisherman and the Flounder gives a stat boost for the fight while being a ranged character. That can be very handy depending on your opponent. I'll show footage of a rare case, but if you find your board looking very evil or you find yourself behind in the stats battle, you can combine Nero and Dr. Frankenstein via crew member or just the wolf spell. In this particular game, I decided I was behind and I needed some scam to catch up. One cool thing to point out about the wolf spell is that character is a dog, therefore catches stats from Nero. This is a weird angle, but can really add a little bit of extra horsepower to your board when you find that you could use a few more characters to close it out. As we wrap this up, let's watch the final fight of this game play out. I'd like to briefly point out you definitely want Arcane Rune for Nero to add another instance of Nero's stat share. You'll also want to keep an eye out for the Fire Rune for your herding dog in order to double up its Dying Breath effect. But let's talk pros and cons. Pros, you instantly have a board on level 6 with a single Nero and some other dogs from earlier in the game. Also, dogs can compete with ultra late game stats builds. Lastly, you don't require many pieces on level 6 to be strong. Cons, however, dogs are a late game comp that rely on multiple 6-cost units. It's an expensive build. Also, this build is vulnerable to scam or stars or cats, but that can be alleviated with the Dr. Frankenstein and wolf shenanigans. Finally, you'll need to do a lot of micromanaging walking the dogs. Likely, you'll need to play it at least once to get used to using your board effectively. This is not a comp you can fall asleep and play.